Now, this morning plenary session is focusing on exactly this topic, on the economic outlook, actually on the global economic outlook, to see where the world is moving, new trends coming in, and to see also where globalization is heading, and to see if globalization is here to stay, or if new models of economic growth are emerging. So I'm very proud to hand over to the moderator, Richard Hames, who is the president and founder of the Asian Foresight Institute based in Bangkok. And Richard, you have been Horasis member for so many years. And please start, and you can introduce your panelists. So big applause to the panel and to Richard, our moderator. Please.
Thank you. Thank you, Frank. We have some similar views and some different views, and what we're not going to do is just say, here's the economic outlook, take it or leave it. We want a free-flowing discussion on what's happening in the world today and why the economy is in the state it's in, whatever that is. And I'm taking as my lead the branding of Horasis, actually, when Frank way back branded it as a visions community. And that's important because we don't want to be monolithic and say the world is just one thing. The real question on my mind in terms of the world economic outlook is what world are we actually talking about? And we've just been discussing this between ourselves. Is it the world of industrial economism, the one that measures GDP above everything else and very little other than that? And certainly not a lot of the things that matter to what it means to be human? Or are we talking about the world of Asia and the energy and optimism and hope we see in this region of genuine entrepreneurialism and a forging towards a very different kind of future? Or are we even talking about a world of men? A world which actually, talking monolithically again, which is a trap I said I wouldn't fall into, but the world has been designed by men, for men, and sometimes we're living the consequences of that. In my early life, I was a composer and conductor. Before that, I was in medicine, but in terms of my music, one of the things I realized at that stage was there's probably a Western composer you may have heard of by the name of Felix Mendelssohn. And probably 50% of his music was actually written by his younger sister, Fanny Mendelssohn. But women have been erased out of history by men, or the winners of battles, of course. So the first question is, what world are we talking about? And that's the world I'd like to start off with discussing with the panel. And I'm asking, well, the panelists will introduce themselves, but you've got their information in the brochure. So I'll pass first of all to Lisa to kick off with, starting with that question at least, and we can flow from there.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So I'm going to start with taking a cultural capital lens to connectivity, innovation, and global cooperation. So to begin with, the world has always been dynamic. What changes is actually the speed and the stakes. So fragmentation, trade tensions, and geopolitical risk are part of everyday reality. And they become especially visible, actually, during periods of transition. So the differentiator for nations and for businesses today is how they navigate uncertainty. Agility is at the core of talent in this regard. It's the core talent in this regard. Yet agility only works when it is anchored in clear values, principles, and sense of purpose. Therefore, strategic stewardship is actually an imperative for legacy and stability. So particularly in periods of volatility, clarity functions as economic and cultural infrastructure. When a nation is clear about what it stands for, how it makes decisions, and how it treats capital, talent, and its citizens, it gives businesses, it gives families and partners the ability to plan, invest, and commit with a measure of confidence. So clarity builds soft power through reliability, and reliable partners attract long-term engagement, even in a fragmented global environment. So connectivity today is expressed through people, through education, and capital moving across borders. It is visible in highly educated families living across jurisdictions and education systems that circulate globally, and private wealth and public wealth, and corporate balance sheets, continued investment across markets. Many of these families operate transnationally, holding multiple passports, managing diversified assets, and planning intergenerationally. So this human and financial connectivity demonstrates globalization continues in practice. So nations that recognize this reality and create stable, transparent environments become trusted partners in global life and markets. When inclusivity is a core value, it is operationalized in practical and systems level decisions that create conditions that catalyze and sustain innovation. Innovation isn't an isolated or special interest objective. And I'll give a point. During the pandemic for Singapore, it's illustrated beautifully. Accelerating digitizing the nation at speed and scale is one thing that happened here. And then also bolstering its new local radio station called Money FM 89.3, which is Singapore's first business and personal finance station. The significance of Money FM lies in its role in shaping a financially literate society. Financial literacy strengthens economic understanding across demographics, agency and problem-solving capacity, and the ability of citizens to engage with and embrace economic change. This deepens connectivity between citizens and the economy and understanding about how domestic economic life is intertwined in global markets. So innovation emerges as a natural expression of inclusive systems, strengthening nations and markets. And finally, global cooperation is sustained through consistent behavior. Over time, it engenders trust and a measure of stability. For nations, for businesses, and for families, clear values and principles underpin resilience. They support preservation including during downturns, and they enable opportunity and growth when conditions improve. Cooperation endures when partners know what to expect from one another, especially under stress. So, in short, globalization continues through people, through values, through public and private systems, such as global education and pension fund investments. And then there's trust. That's extremely important to build. So nations that combine agility with clarity, sustain momentum, and shape durable global cooperation and legacies, even in a fragmented world.
Thank you, Lisa. What's interesting for me in what Lisa has just said is that the values, the traditional values that we actually need for a vibrant economy, such as trust, interconnectedness, resilience. You mentioned the containers we use, one of which is the nation state. And one of the problems I have, and Parag, I'm going to pass to you, one of the problems I have is the question of whether the nation state should still be the dominant container for any kind of activity, given that we cross boundaries in terms of the atmosphere, even travel, digitally. All the boundaries traditionally around the nation state seem to have weakened and dissolving. Parag, you must have a very definite opinion about that kind of thing.
I'm glad that you raised that as a provocation, because I did want to speak precisely about scale and measurement when we talk about the world economy. But first of all, welcome, Frank, to Singapore for your first Horasis meeting here. Pleasure to have you here and the whole community. You and I have been friends for a long time, and I've been so impressed at your ability to sequentially, annually, convene such rich dialogues all over the world. And it's about time you made it to Singapore, so welcome, and to the whole community. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you again, Richard, for the question. I love that Lisa was so easily able to glide between levels of analysis, right, from the global to the regional to the national to the local, and that's a reminder that pure economics, when we think about whether it is the optimization of land, labor, and capital, whether it is about the system of transactions by which supply meets demand, whether it is the capitalist marketplaces that enable buyers and sellers to transact, there isn't anything inherently national per se about that, right? We reduce it to the national level for purposes of comparison, and then it gives this illusion of control that it is the state itself that contains, you use the word container, and I'm using the word again almost accidentally, that contains it, and that's not really true in a global world. When I started studying the kind of economics of cities, right, the underlying trend of rapid global urbanization, most of the human population living in cities, in our lifetimes, probably 80, 90% of the world population will live in cities. And then I looked at the economic threads that link cities to each other, especially the mega cities, those 70 or 80 cities that represent the vast majority of the world economy. I said, take the city of London, take the city of New York, take the city of Dubai, and ask yourself if you can actually disentangle and identify for me the precise value of the GDP of one of those cities, divorced from, independent of the flows and the connections between that city and other cities. And it is like quantum physics, right? It's not something you can actually pinpoint formally. And that's the way we should understand the world economy today, is something that is the result of a very rapidly emergent set of complex transactions and interactions happening at a global scale. So we do have a global economy, but that global economy very much masks the differential performance of different cities and different nations. Over the last 30 or 40 years, every year we'll have a World Bank or IMF headline forecast that says global growth forecasted to be 2.3% or 1.8%. But how useful has that number been over the last 30 years? The answer is pretty much zero, because we know that it has been China and India and other specific economies that have done the lion's share of that legwork in lifting up the global. So for any question, there's the right level at which to answer the question. And in this case, I'm glad that we're interrogating whether or not even using global is useful. Yes, there are global transactions, but it's a very bumpy and uneven landscape of who's making the most of them. And of course, to link it to Lisa's point, it is the places that offer stability, trust, institutions, all of those kinds of cultural and societal underpinnings that are going to harness global dynamics and opportunities. Whenever people, right now we're at a point in the world economy, and we have been for some years, where we have this unresolved, I think, debate about whether globalization is in a tailspin. You hear a lot of people asserting globalization is retrenching, globalization is reversing, it's the end of globalization. We've heard it actually time and again for the past 25 years. People said that after the 9/11 terrorist attacks 25 years ago. People said that after the global financial crisis, which was almost 20 years ago. People said that after Trump's first election and Brexit in 2016, which was 10 years ago. People said that with COVID, 5 years ago, and people are saying it now with the U.S.-China new Cold War and tariffs. 5 times in everyone in this room's recent memory, 5 times people have pronounced globalization dead. And yet globalization, seen holistically and comprehensively, is thriving in unimaginable ways, right? So that's the measurement issue. The question is that people always answer this or tackle this issue from their own perspective. And where they stand depends upon where they sit, so to speak. And I always remind people, don't worry about the fate of globalization, and by extension, don't worry about the fate of the global economy. Ask yourself if you are a participant in it. Are you a part of those flows? Are you connected to those flows? If you are not, if you are being bypassed by all of the thriving flows of globalization that result in this global economic picture, then you're bound to feel that globalization is in a tailspin or in reverse. But that is patently not true. So I think that we can actually be fairly optimistic about the world economy as a whole, because I'm generally optimistic about globalization persisting despite all of the obstacles being thrown in its path, and that globalization is certainly going to be shaped and perpetually reshaped, but it's its own adaptability that allows it to thrive where its rivals and where opposition to it ultimately lines up failing. And you see that at the global level with tariffs and protectionism that wind up doing more self-harm. You can see it with political populism that winds up inhibiting the growth of domestic economies by not bringing the labor that's necessary. In so many different ways, you'll always be on the right side of history if you are pro-globalization.
Thank you so much. We'll stay with the current paradigm at the moment as I pass to Vinod, because Vinod is an exceptional businessman. You've created businesses, you've run businesses. You're comfortable with the kind of paradigm we sit in terms of conventional notions of capitalism. How do you respond to the kinds of changes that are happening, the threat of climate change, for example, which I think is a very euphemistic term. Let's call it global heating, because that's what it is, and pollution at the moment. How do you resolve those kinds of issues with doing business today and being successful in business today?
Thank you, Richard. First, I'm a social capitalist, which means I'm a true capitalist. I want to make money. But to make money, I need to have people that have money, which means I need people out of poverty into the middle class. I can't take your money unless you have it, right? So I have to play a role in poverty eradication. That is pure capitalism, sustainable wealth creation. Now that's the future. That's the only thing that will work in the world, because you're not fighting human nature. We have to be realistic. We can throw slogans, we can talk about everything else. Climate change, right? Climate change is no longer this throwaway line for ESG. Climate change is a matter of a balance sheet now, okay? Maybe not 10 years ago. Maybe it was an ESG line. Maybe it was a CSR line. I find these monikers of CSR total, excuse my language, bullshit. I mean, it's all crap. You know, we use it as an excuse to plant, I don't know, 500 trees on the roadside, and we've done our bit. Allow our staff to go and, you know, work one day, half a day a month in some sort of orphanage or some sort of botanical garden. And okay, our company's done our bit. All that's changed. The reality is climate change affects everything we do, simply because it affects our balance sheet, it affects our business, our ability to trade, our ability to manufacture, our ability to find a market. It's the reality today. And like that, many things have to change. We are currently being very reactive, like human nature is generally. It is stupid, and we don't seem to learn. We react to, as Parag says, I mean, we're reacting to stuff all the time. You know, let's remember, when industrialization happened, when machines happened, oh my God, it's the end of the world, people are going to lose their jobs, nothing's going to happen, you know? Then the computer came into play. Oh my God, the computer's going to take over humanity's ability to do their own thing. Then the internet came in. Oh my gosh, internet is going to dominate the world, and everyone's going to lose their jobs. It's always something, Y2K. Everyone remembers Y2K. We are a reactive species. But for some reason, we don't learn that life, business, politics, everything is a game of chess, not checkers. It's chess. And if we look at it from that basis, it's these strategic moves we have to make and we plan for. And we allow politicians to act at their own best interest, which is short term. They drive emotion, they drive instability, they drive, why? Because they need power. Emptier brain, smaller stomach, the more control they have. So I bring all this up because this all plays a role in how we look at our economic outlook going forward. We have an opportunity to change the way things are, because that's how the world is going. You know, we worry about about regionalization and oh my gosh, the end of globalization, as you say, which I agree with Parag, it's nonsense. Never going to change, right? It evolves as to how we do business and how we operate. And I want to take it back to why we're here. It's India, right? This is the India conference. And what a critical role India has to play. Because India, I think, has the ability now to show, with the number of young entrepreneurs, dynamic visionaries, technological innovation that's coming out of India, how this can be done with a soul. India is one of these unique countries that is evolving, yet it accepts its cultural identity, its cultural strength, its spirituality. It is not moving forward and giving it up. And if it can do that and grow, but understand that growth without compassion means nothing. Nationalism without compassion is meaningless. And if India can have that balance and maintain that soul, there's a huge opportunity for the world to learn from it. I mean, you're talking about 1.5 billion people. We're talking about 450, 500 million middle class. Granted, 500 million below the poverty line, but still 500 million people in the middle class. And what, 380 million people with more money than they know what to do with. This is a very unique country. Some would argue that their biggest problem is democracy, but you know, that can be subjective. So coming back to this idea of climate change and economic outlook and globalization. Globalization exists, it will never change. It'll be masked in different forms, but it will continue regardless. Politicians will talk about nationalism, will talk about insularity, simply because they need it. But it won't change how business is done, because markets are markets, and will always be there. What we must be careful about and understand, and I don't want to keep going on, but is that socio-economic development is as critical as economic development and climate change. There is no point saving the planet if you're going to let everyone die. There is no point saving the planet if you're going to allow for famine. We live in a world that has enough money, that has enough food to feed everybody multiple times over. And yet we still live in a world where we have simultaneous epidemics of both starvation and obesity, sometimes in the same city. This stupidity has to stop. And we just accept it. And I think the leadership here and the people here have to do something about it and say, stop the stupidity. We're being dumb. Why are we allowing it to happen? We all accept it's stupid. We all accept that this is not the way it should be. The world is rich enough. We can all make money. And I like making money. I like my toys. I'm not a hypocrite. I have a super yacht. I like my jet. I like it all. But if I'm smart enough to have all that, I'm certainly smart enough to lift my ecosystem up, to lift the people around me up, to build so I can make more. And so I hope that going forward, India plays that critical role of strengthening this line about social capitalism, about ensuring business is no longer about just, I'm not involved in socioeconomic development. I'm not involved in ensuring people can come out of poverty, because we live off the people. We live off economic prosperity that the people provide. So for our own sake, we need to make sure that people keep growing and our markets keep widening. And I want to say that India has that critical role and opportunity to do something that the world can follow.
That's wonderful to hear that. I want to go back 70 years. I'm going back, so I'm older than most people, probably everybody in this audience. I remember I was educated in the UK, and I remember sitting in a classroom looking at a map on the wall and being told that all the pink bits were owned by the British Empire. And one of the largest pink bits was India. And it wasn't until later that I started traveling around the world that I realized what damage the British had done, actually, in India. Yes, there was a legacy, but the damage being done by colonialism still today is quite extraordinary. So what I want to do now is to pivot to this region and the differences in worldview between the the Occidental, the Western mindset and worldview, or world system, if you like, and the worldviews that inhabit this region. And there are fundamentally two that are important. And I'm excluding for the moment, in terms of the global south, I'm excluding Africa and the kind of Ubuntu worldview you get in many parts of Africa. Anil, I'm coming to you in a minute for wisdom. But I want to point out that the fundamental differences between the Sinic worldview and the Indic worldview, in other words, China and India, are fundamentally opposed to the worldview that grew from the European Enlightenment in the 18th century, where the cult of the individual, Cartesian logic, which divided things into binaries, and Lisa and I were talking about this previously, everything's a binary, left or right, red or blue, yes or no, good or bad, and those binaries are still an impediment for us. Those differ considerably from both the Indic and the Sinic worldviews and potential world systems, because the energy around those worldviews in India and China particularly are what energizes this particular part of the world. Globalization, yes, but what contribution in the future does this region have, Anil?
So thank you very much, Richard. I'd like to take up the point that you made about different worldviews. If we look back a few years ago, we find that India and China were both very reactive to globalization. And they were always on the defensive in world for a long period of time, till they started realizing the benefits of globalization. And obviously, both economies, and I would say Asia in general, has embraced globalization because they found merit in whatever was happening in terms of a world order which has slowly settled down, which everybody got used to. And suddenly now in 2025, we find ourselves that this world order has become fragmented, it's different, it's not working in the way that everybody was used to it working. So that's the difference that we have today. So where are we today in terms of globalization? I would say that we are evolving into something which is different in terms of the orderly way in which the globalization used to work. And why has this happened? It's because we've had enormous amount of geopolitical conflict in the recent past. So that's reorganized the way countries trade with each other, the way they look at each other, and the whole question of reliability towards each other has crept in. Supply chains have become very important. And suddenly you find that there are new pathways to economic cooperation which are required in the world. That's point number one. My second point is about, I'll pick up from where you talked about this region. And the region of Asia, and I would leave out China for the moment, but if you look at India, in the recent past, the reforms that have taken place in India, and they're still happening, by the way, in terms of labor in particular. I think it's a very important pathway to change in India. Capital, of course, has been changing for a while. But you also have the digitization of the way you do business and you do investments. And that's something which is very, very important. Within India also, there is a reorganization of the way the states and the center think about each other. And that was an issue some years ago, but now it seems to be sorting itself out. So I would say that the old order is giving way to something which is new. And in this, India and this region, Asia in general, stand out. We're sitting in Singapore today. It's the hub of digitization, and it's also the center of entrepreneurship. So Asia as a whole, I would say, is continued with its connectivity initiatives, its investments into infrastructure, its emphasis on digitization, and a general energy which should be there in terms of change has not waned. It's just the way that the others are behaving in terms of what used to be the way of behavior earlier has changed. Third point that I'd like to make is about how should India and Asia therefore adapt themselves in this situation. I think it's very important to look at the strengths of each other. So I would say services, for example, the strength of India, manufacturing capacities which are already there in Asia, the global value chains of which India should be part of, for instance. For a while now, India has not been part of the global value chains to the extent that it should be. But lately, we've seen a change happening there again, because if you look at RCEP, India is not part of RCEP, but it's taken part in a lot of multilateral institutions. It's also part of bilateral arrangements which have evolved, especially over the last year. So these linkages are developing, and they in turn will create the desire to actually create better linkages in terms of what we see as new pathways. The new pathways which I see is things like semiconductors or digitization or healthcare or sustainable agriculture in this region. And all this is happening in the bilateral context, but we need much more of that if this region has to grow as a whole collectively. Last point is about the world in general. And there again, I think what we need is much more of new ways of financing. So green finance, blended finance, more public-private partnerships, for instance. The fact that there is food security issues in many parts of the world, that requires more agricultural linkages. There is suddenly health emergencies which arose after COVID, and they've not gone away, by the way. So you need more pathways and also linkages in terms of secure healthcare going forward. So that would form the nucleus of what we call the new form of globalization, where Asia plays a big role, where India plays a big role. And in conclusion, what I would say is that it's not globalization which is changing, it's the way we are evolving. And we have to see what kind of new globalization we land up with, which is beneficial to all of us. And Vinod's point about climate change is also very important. We've ignored it for far too long. I think, fortunately, countries like India are taking the lead in climate change. They've set goals for themselves, which is extremely important. And unless we pay attention to what's happening in climate change, unless we collectively work towards the solutions for what is happening around the world, it's ultimately the businesses which will suffer. So we've got to keep that in mind and make sure as we go forward that we blend that into our policies in Asia in particular and the world in general. Thank you.
So many different points there. With blended finance, it's an interesting ideal. In practice, sometimes it's so difficult. And I'm experiencing this at the moment. I'm the strategic advisor to a new city that's being built in Thailand. And I'm advising in terms of the medical and health and well-being part of that. But the model for financing that is a blended model, and the practical difficulties we're running into is extraordinary. But it's one kind of disruption. Another kind of disruption that is on everyone's minds, I know, is digitalization. And what does that mean? My next book is due out in January from Triarchy Press. It's called Teaching Silicon How to Feel. And it's to do with the ethics and guidelines we need to put around the next generation of AI, which at the moment isn't I. Yes, it's artificial, but it's certainly not intelligence. It doesn't even count very accurately. And the large language models we use and think of as being AI at the moment are maxing out in terms of what they're able to do. The next generation is all about artificial sentience, creating a new species, if you like. And that has the potential to be very disruptive around everything that we're talking about. Lisa, I'm going to pass to you in a minute because I want your reactions on that kind of disruption to things like traditional values of trust, interconnectedness, and the kind of reliability we put in each other. How much trust are we going to lose when the machines really do take many more jobs than we imagine even today?
Thank you. First, I would say it goes back to what I had said earlier, that agreeing on what values and principles today for a nation, I would say, that kind of gives a indication to everybody else, like the citizens, the businesses, like the direction. It's kind of like a pathway. Like this is how, these are important to us, you know, and business and education and all that needs to think about that. And I wouldn't necessarily say it's traditional values. I mean, you know, we're moving forward. What's the reality now in a country? That should have like longevity for sure. But I don't think like thinking about going back to something is the right way to think about it. I think it's like what is actually really deep and inherent in our society. In every society is slightly different, but at least you have somewhere and something to understand, and the expression of it, whether it's through in education, let's say, with AI and, you know, with digitization, will start to take a different shape if you actually have some basic principles that, you know, and pathway with like a North Star in a way that can at least give you some guidance, because right now everybody's scared. And the reality is it's not going to not happen. So instead of being really worried, of course we should be worried about how it's implemented, but instead we still need to, we can keep doing that, but it's going to happen. So how are we going to manage it? So I think we do need to go back and talk to, you know, our citizens and explain like how it's being used. Like basically we're still in a position where, let's say parents are saying to universities, oh, I'm worried that, you know, will my child use AI? And you're thinking, well, I'm worried if they do not navigate this and actually teach them. So we're still like in this very basic kind of conversation and understanding and fear, and we haven't scaffolded it at all. So I think that is very important as a very kind of basic step to understanding how to do it. And yes, there will be disruptions, but then of course, and there'll be loss of jobs like we're seeing today, even if it hasn't been realized yet. You know, even if, you know, people are looking to the future and they're banking on, like, you know, businesses are like, okay, I'm going to cut the staff, and then they'll rehire. I mean, labor, you know, there's labor out there, there's smart, you know, graduates, and they will hire them. So I think injecting a bit of like connectivity among citizens and actually thinking about how to continue as a value to bring everybody up, not as a charity, not as a, you know, like deep moral, it has a morality to it, but that doesn't move necessarily business. Like if you see that all these boats rising and opportunity and people will find their place in it, that's really important. And I think this fear and not addressing it is very worrying, actually.
So, but actually then you're pointing to the social contract in terms of exchange of energy for wages or input for wages.
It's not, that's a very simple. Right. I mean, I think like that's one dimension, like, yeah. like you were saying, like bringing up everybody so that they can, or bringing up, you know, your citizens or your country or, you know, your businesses. It's about stewardship, actually. It's actually about like thinking through things, stewardship within families, stewardship within businesses and corporates and countries. You know, not just, oh, we're going to do this, you know, oh, we have to do this, but understanding that it's dynamic and that actually just doing this now we're in this moment now, but it's going to change, and we have to be on, recognize that and stay on top of it and keep checking in. Okay, where is this going? Where do we want it to go? So it takes a lot of, it takes more than just a nation, the government to do that. You have to embed it throughout, from top to bottom in a way.
I'm glad you introduced the term stewardship. I'm going to offend a lot of people here, so please forgive me, but I'm always provocative. I would argue at the moment that we talk about leaders and leadership, and I would say there's no leadership in the world at the moment, and leadership is misunderstood. It's not an individual phenomenon at all today. It's a collective experience. Leadership doesn't happen in a vacuum. It involves people. It's not just evolving from one person. And going back even to the time I was working in Apple with Steve Jobs, I was on the public record then as saying with Steve, and his dynamo in that business was actually Johnny Ive, the designer, that it was the team effort that was most important. So changing the language around things, I think, is very, very important. Yesterday, I was very swept away, very moved by the fact we're in Singapore. I've visited Singapore on so many different occasions, and Singapore's always been to me a surface experience. Yesterday, I experienced under the surface in detail, being taken around by Dr. John Lim, who's a professor at SIT, understanding the fundamental changes that are happening in an extraordinary city like this in terms of preparing for the future and stewarding the future. And Parag, you've lived here for quite a while. What's your feeling about living in a city like this, which is, in a way, it's got, Singapore has one foot in the past and one foot certainly striding towards the future?
And Singapore is an extraordinary place, so there are many ways to answer that question, but I have to go back to the word stewardship because I'm so grateful to Lisa for raising it. If there's one word, and this is in contrast to everything I said in the opening remarks, but we did touch upon the state. That was the original framing of your first question. If there's one word that most defines our world today in terms of distortions, inefficiencies, and perpetuating and enabling immoral behavior, it's the word sovereignty. And the one-word antidote to that notion of sovereignty that's defined our world for about 250 years is stewardship. And we need to trace or design an arc in which we move the world from the de facto, de jure, pernicious inertia of sovereignty that governs so much of how we behave without us even knowing it, whether it's invisible or visible, to a world in which stewardship is a stronger governing paradigm. That is the most important word that all of us can take away, and it is up to us. The beautiful thing about the term stewardship is that no one can, because it's not a legal concept, it isn't defined for you. You get to say, I am going to be the steward of, Lisa used the example of my family, my community, my village, my town, my region, my province, my ecosystem. Right? It isn't international law or Washington that tells you what sovereignty is or what stewardship is. I think it's a beautiful thing, so I hope we can all hold that term in our minds. And that is a great segue to Singapore. A city that has said, and one of the most fundamental points I always make about Singapore is simply to contrast it with almost every other post-colonial country in the world. Let's remember that 3/4 of the nation states on Earth were born after 1945, with the collapse, with the end of World War II, the dismantling of the British and French empires, and the broader decolonization movement. We had 51 original members of the United Nations. We have about 200 today. Of the 150 states in the world that did not exist as sovereign independent states in 1945, this might be the one, quite possibly the only one, where you can be truly certain that 5 years from now, 10 years from now, it may be even better than it is today. That's a spectacular accomplishment. And a lot of people will say, oh, sure, it's just small. or other kinds, or, it had a strongman ruler from independence for the first several decades. You can throw all of these simplistic notions at it, but for anyone who saw last weekend's bombshell revelations, Operation Albatross, and the files that were revealed, and Lee Hsien Loong himself, held a special event at the National Library Board to discuss how actually uncertain the separation from Malaysia was in 1965. There was so much that was uncertain at the time. So nothing as successful as Singapore can be explained only through one thing, such as just one man or just scale or size. It took a village, right? And stewardship has been so key. And the culture that has emerged in Singapore is one which everyone feels that they're a stakeholder. So stakeholdership and stewardship very much go hand in hand, right? And even the foreigners. So let me make a broader point, which is linking it back to cities. What is fortunately no longer the case is that Singapore is not the only city-state or city that views itself as in effect sovereign and decisive, needing to act decisively over its own affairs. If you're American, you're familiar with the idea of sanctuary cities, right? Los Angeles, New York, saying, you know what, we're not going to let the ICE, let's call them militias of Washington come in and kidnap foreigners who are legally here. We need them in our economy, right? Look at the population of London and its vote against Brexit versus the provincial or less densely populated areas. So cities have taken it upon themselves to seize the moment in a way and to say whatever chaos is afflicting the rest of the country or federal politics, we are going to make sure that our city remains stable. And what do all those cities have in common? Look at every great global city of the past, of the present, and probably the future, Singapore included, is that they have a very high percentage of foreign-born people in them, right? Whether it's New York or London or Dubai or Singapore, Hong Kong, Toronto, Sydney, Berlin, you name it, you'll have anywhere from 30 to 90% of the population be foreign-born. And so identity evolves in the city's identity, what some call civicism, right? The kind of patriotism of a city evolves to embrace that talent. And that's especially important today. And one of the things that one can praise Singapore about is not only how it handled its post-colonial moment in contrast to other post-colonial societies, where it's no longer punitively and suspiciously looking backwards and blaming colonial powers for the ills that it faces. And we know this, quite frankly, as Indians still, right? Many Indians still blame the British for this and British for that. And many people in Africa blame the British for this and the French for that. Singapore is one place where they don't blame anyone for anything, right? So this is the hand we were dealt, we're going to deal with it. So in my academic work, I've contrasted 150 post-colonial countries and said, let's just look at the culture of political blame and see which places are stepping up and saying, I'm going to make the most of the situation, and whatever I've absorbed from the past, good or bad, I'm going to make the most of. And Singapore is unique in that category. But I see cities of the world saying, whatever the chaos and turbulence is of the world, we're going to make the most and navigate those tensions. And that's where Singapore is a real leader, among others. And I've spent 20 years working with the United Arab Emirates government. I spent my childhood there in Abu Dhabi, and they've been benchmarking themselves to Singapore. And what is the place that is now calling itself, the capital of capital, and has become, alongside Singapore, and even larger in the sense of sovereign wealth, assets under management, larger than Singapore, Abu Dhabi, another place that's saying the past is the past, right? And so many people can be extremely pessimistic about the future systemically and structurally, but you see a lot of hope when you look at these cities rising up and saying we're going to be stewards of our immediate geography, of our society, of those that we're lucky enough to have and welcome here, and we're going to radiate outwards and build these networks among cities, and that's going to be the new structure and scaffolding of global order.
One of the things that struck me yesterday, because on previous visits to Singapore, you're immediately struck by the architecture, of course, and it's such a small place. I'm Australian, and so Singapore is a tiny speck for me in terms of the world. But one of the things that struck me yesterday was the human scale of the city, because normally you don't actually experience that immediately because of the skyscrapers and the architecture, but you go down to the granularity on the ground of relationships, the greening that's taking place, how things are actually designed to take account of the changes that are happening in the world. Now, when we search for original things like the values I'm talking about, original values that matter to humanity. I mean, the obvious one is love, but let's ignore that for a minute and go on to others. We very often reach back now, and increasingly so, to indigenous societies. Now, this is going to be a leap for some people, but one of the things that impresses me about talking to and listening to yourself is the fact that you want to make money, but you want to bring compassion into that, and social impact matters. A lot of what I hear Vinod saying is very much related to values that go back thousands of years. That's important to you, isn't it?
It's a question of survival. If we look at civilizations, the destruction, the development of civilizations, history has shown us, you know, and if we don't look at complexity, we don't evolve. 2026, 2027, going forward, true leadership is going to look at the person. I mean, true leadership will be defined by the person that looks at the long term, not the short term. Because the easy way is the short term. True leadership is not about watching where everyone runs and then jumping ahead of that. True leadership, and what this world needs, is that leader that knows where we need to go, and I'm going to take you there kicking and screaming if I need to. But that's where we're going. That certainty, that direction, that leadership. And that's complex. It's not simple. And that's what the world needs to understand. We're complex. There's no simplistic answer to anything that we're doing now. And I think the future, if we want to look at it from that perspective, how can I put it? The leaders need to understand one simple truth. Power, well, wealth is temporary. Power is borrowed. So the only thing we really have is impact. Real impact. And what impact are we going to make? What impact is going to last? Good or bad? But what impact are we going to have? That's the one thing leadership can do. And why I say this to this group of people is, these are all leaders. Everyone here are leaders. You guide, you lead, you give direction, you inspire, you advise. And if we don't come to that fundamental truth that at the end of the day, it's about that impact we're going to make, and that we're all a domino. You see, I look at things very simplistically. We're all dominoes. We all have to fall and knock the next domino. It's not the question as whether I'm going to change the world, or I'm going to ensure economic success for a specific region or a specific company. It's that I might inspire you, Richard, and you might have a conversation with Anil that gives him an idea. And Anil speaks to his minister, and his minister suddenly says, that's a damn good idea, I'm going to change everything. And that changes everything. But here's the thing. If you don't have that initial conversation, everything stops. The dominoes don't fall. The impact doesn't happen. So right now, everyone here matters. But Parag says matters because who does he inspire? Who does he impact? I can tell you now, I heard him speak at a conference just recently. And a lot of what he said I've used. I shared your slides with people to talk about it. I said, look, you've got to read what this guy's saying because this has impacted. Think about it. Now, who knows how that impacted someone else in the way they're thinking? We all have a very specific role to play, and we have to play it. And that does change the world. And we all have to it's not a throwaway line. You know, and I go back to climate change. Let's be honest, what did everyone talk about climate change a decade ago? Just a decade ago. Even 5 years ago, we were still like, yeah, it's climate change, but it's okay. I mean, let's be honest, there were people that said it didn't exist. Right? But today, who would dare say it doesn't? What company can operate without even taking into consideration the impact it'll have with everything it does? So I think, for me, what you just said is it's so critical to my survival as a businessman, to the survival of any society, and any, you want to call it civilization, nation, whatever.
May I
Yeah, absolutely,
just
yes.
quickly? Yeah, I mean, obviously impact, absolutely, I think I agree. And I'm thinking, like, just to add on to that, it goes like full circle back to stewardship that eventually leads to some measure of institutionalization. And I don't mean huge. I'm just saying, like, if it's really having an impact, sometimes like the funder of something that's impactful, you know, and they're doing amazing things, but then when they die, or when they're no longer, like, you know, interested, or whatever happened, or they would be interested, but then that amazing, like, start, because you're starting something of longevity, you know, that will have a path. And so I think, like, the next thing is to think about legacy, even like in their impact. So in terms of it, because if you think legacy-led, you know, like long-term, like then one will function differently. You know, whether it is like long-term or not, I think that that's really important.
You're just a mind reader. You just pinched what I was going to say.
Oh, sorry.
I'd like to go back to what we're here to discuss, World Economic Outlook, and just a final thought from all of us here in terms of 7 generations ahead. How can we today take steps to ensure that those generations to come have better, more prosperous, happier lives, more productive and fulfilled than our children and we have today? How could we think 7 generations ahead in terms of the world economic outlook for the world and for this region? Parag.
Sure, and I wouldn't mind tackling this question that's come up on the Slido that relates exactly to that. The causality really matters. There's a presumption that we are just reacting to the trends of the moment, and that really the world economic structure is so hostage to the whims of tariff politics and so forth, which is implied in this question here, that, you know, tariffs are what are fragmenting and regionalizing the world. There's some very positive things, actually, that go back way before the Trump administration that explain regionalism in the world economy. For example, you can explain most of the North American regionalism of the past 20 years with zero reference to Trump. You can explain it through the shale energy revolution, right? Lowering the cost of energy inputs is what has been the strongest underlying impetus, plus automation technologies to strengthening domestic investment and drawing in more foreign investment. All of that predates 2016 and Trump. There's a direct sequencing here. This is not disputable. In Europe, it goes back to post-World War II. Europe has been the most regionally internally integrated. And of course, with Asia, it goes back to the Asian financial crisis of 1997. Every crisis, every exogenous economic shock in the world has convinced Asians that they need to bring down their barriers to each other in order to compensate for things they can't control in the external environment. So we've had regionalism happening for 25, 30 years. And it's a good thing, and this gets to your 7 generations, because not all reduction in globalization is bad, even for someone who's a globalization maximalist like myself. Why do we have to drill, you know, minerals and carbon and fossil fuels out of the ground and put it on tankers and sail it around the world when we have abundant renewable energy? If we reduce the globalization of fossil fuel energy to zero, because every location has a circular energy system, that would be phenomenal. I'm happy to see globalization statistically reduce for that reason, to that end. Ditto for food. Why do we put avocados on ships from Australia and sail them to Canada? There is zero need, given today's technology, to do that. So if we reduce the globalization statistically of global agricultural supply chains, that would be a wonderful deglobalization to have. And so the net result of what we can achieve is actually much more localized circularity or bioregional circularity in ways that transcend administrative geographies, my province, my state, my country, right? It really is about bioregions at the end of the day and demographic zones. And let them be connected in ways that maximize their comparative advantage. And that's the world that we should ascribe to tomorrow and still 7 generations from now.
Anil.
So picking up from there, I think trusted in and localized supply chains. Second, paying attention to the climate change and bringing about policies which sustain that in the long term as far as economic growth is concerned. And finally, bringing some order into how we govern artificial intelligence in the future.
Got 29 seconds, so I'll keep it short. Look, you've heard everything already, so I'll just keep it in one word: hope. That's what the world needs: hope. Whether it's about our own economic prosperity, whether it's about Sudan, whether it's about Palestine, whether it's about Ukraine, Myanmar, what's going on in Thailand and Cambodia, what's going on everywhere really. We need to ensure the next generation have hope. And as I was saying earlier, hope is nuclear. Doesn't take a lot. One drop. One drop is enough. And I think we all have a role to play in ensuring, for whatever economic outlook, be it India, anywhere else, and India has a significant role to play in providing that hope. And if we put that hope in, 7 generations, 10 generations, we'll keep growing and we will get there. It will always be 3 steps forward and 2 steps back, 4 steps forward, 1 step back. That is the reality of human nature. Can't help ourselves. But that net positive flow, we will get there. But hope is that critical energy required to get to where we need to get to.
And I'll be very short. just you know, you've all said everything. I would just say, going back to some very fundamentals, purpose. In the future, each generation, we don't know what this world's going to look like 5, 7 generations. But we know human beings, and human beings at a very nuclear level need purpose. And then again, those values and principles that need to be stewarded. They need to be adjusted. We have to, we just don't know. I don't mean adjusted like quarterly or anything, but we need to revisit them. Are we actually aligned? Or is our world quite different? Do we need to kind of reassess these a little bit? So I think that goes back, and that you can do in the family, and definitely in education, which we didn't get into enough, probably, but I'm sure we will other places. Singapore does that so well. Our children, I've lived here for almost 19 years, and our children went to one of the local Singapore international schools. And that idea of embedding, somehow or another, embedding this ability to work together, to care about the community, it's real. And it's and that is a legacy. It's a thread from the past to now, and looking to the future. So,
thank you very much.
I'll just say that.
Thank you. I'd just like to end up with another provocative thought, which I hinted at right at the beginning. And I think it's a thought worth reflection. Look at us. Look around you. What do you see? You see a world designed by men for men. We are so in need of the feminine in business, in politics, in engineering, in science, and we have erased that in the past. We need to accommodate that and make sure that going forward, what we do today and the way of injecting hope as a strategy is to appeal to all humanity, not just 50% of humanity. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for the panel.